My manager fired me 2 weeks before my 20-year pension kicked in, saying I was no longer a good fit for company culture. When I asked HR about my pension, they said employment was terminated before vesting period completed. I just smiled and said, "You're absolutely right about company culture." Then I sent everything to the labor board. This happened about 8 months ago, and I'm finally ready to tell the whole story. Fair warning, this is going to be really long, but I promise the ending is absolutely worth it. I've been lurking on this sub for years reading revenge stories, never thinking I'd have one worth sharing. Boy, was I wrong. Some background about me. I, 44 male, married to Sarah for 18 years with 2 kids, Emma, who's 16, and Jake, who's 14. I've been working construction my whole adult life, specifically as a project supervisor for a construction company here in Ohio. Before you think I'm some college boy who doesn't know real work, let me set the record straight about where I came from. I grew up poor as dirt. My dad was a roofer who broke his back when I was 12 and never worked again. I still remember the day it happened. He fell through a weak spot in an old warehouse roof and landed on concrete 15 feet below. The doctors said he was lucky to walk again, but his construction days were over. Mom cleaned houses to keep us afloat while Dad collected disability that barely covered groceries, let alone rent on our tiny apartment. Watching my dad struggle with depression and chronic pain taught me early that you can't count on anyone else to take care of your family. That's why the pension meant everything to me. It was security my dad never had. I started working construction summers when I was 15, carrying materials, cleaning job sites, basically whatever grunt work they'd let a kid do. The older guys took me under their wing and taught me the trade. They'd show me how to read blueprints during lunch breaks, explain why we use certain materials for different applications, and most importantly, drill safety protocols into my head until they became second nature. By 17, I could frame a house, run electrical conduit, and pour concrete with the best of them. I remember my first solo concrete pour, a small residential driveway. I was so nervous about getting the mix and timing right that I barely slept the night before. But when the homeowner shook my hand and said it was the best driveway work he'd ever seen, I knew I'd found my calling. I paid my own way through community college working nights at a lumber yard and weekends doing roofing with my uncle. Took me 4 years to get a 2-year degree in construction management because I could only afford part-time classes, but I was determined to be more than just another guy swinging a hammer his whole life. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that, but I wanted to build something bigger for my family. When I started at my current job in 2004, they were a mid-sized general contractor with about 80 employees. They did everything: residential developments, commercial buildings, some light industrial work. The owner, Jim, was old school but fair. He believed in taking care of employees who took care of the business. The big draw for me was their pension plan. After 20 years of service, you'd get 55% of your final salary for life, plus full health coverage. In construction, where your body gets beat to heck and most guys are lucky to work past 60, that pension was like winning the lottery. It was the kind of benefit that doesn't exist anymore, but this company had kept it as a way to retain loyal employees. I worked my rear end off for 19 years and 10 months, started as an assistant project manager, and worked my way up to senior project supervisor. I was managing 3 to 4 major projects at any given time, each worth between $800,000 to $2.5 million. My projects consistently came in on time and under budget. I had the respect of subcontractors, suppliers, and clients. More importantly, I built a reputation for safety that was legendary in our area. In 20 years, I never had a single serious injury on any of my job sites. I had this rule: anyone who cut corners on safety got one warning, then they were off my crew permanently. Didn't matter if they were the best welder in the state or related to someone important. Safety wasn't negotiable. I remember one incident about 5 years ago where a new electrician tried to work on a live panel without shutting off the breaker. I physically pulled him away from the panel and sent him home for the day. He complained to management that I was being unreasonable, but when they reviewed my safety record versus the company average, that conversation ended real quick. My crews respected me because I never asked them to do anything I wouldn't do myself. If we were pouring concrete in 95-degree heat, I was right there sweating with them. If we had to work a Saturday to meet a deadline, I brought the guys lunch and made sure they got overtime pay. That kind of leadership doesn't come from business school. It comes from understanding that construction is about people, not just materials and schedules. In construction, that's like having a perfect driving record for 20 years. It just doesn't happen unless you're really good at what you do and genuinely care about your crew's safety. I was 6 weeks away from my 20-year mark when everything went to heck. 6 weeks away from securing my family's future, from knowing that even if I got hurt on the job, we'd be okay. My kids could go to college without drowning in debt. Sarah could quit her job at the insurance office if she wanted to. That's when they hired Amanda Chen as the new operations director. Jim's son Kevin had been gradually taking over the business as Jim got closer to retirement. Kevin was all right, not as sharp as his dad, but he understood construction and respected the guys who'd built the company. The problem was Kevin thought the company needed fresh perspective and modern management techniques. Enter Amanda Chen, 29 years old with an MBA from some fancy school and exactly zero construction experience. Kevin hired her as operations director at a salary that was probably double what most of our foremen were making. Her job was supposedly to streamline operations and improve efficiency. From day one, this woman acted like she was doing us all a huge favor by gracing us with her presence. She showed up to job sites in designer heels and white blazers, carrying a tablet and taking notes about things she clearly didn't understand. She'd walk around construction sites like she was touring a museum, pointing at equipment and asking questions that made it obvious she'd never been on a job site in her life. I'll never forget her first site visit to one of my commercial projects. We were in the middle of setting steel beams for a warehouse expansion, and she shows up in those ridiculous heels, trying to walk across uneven ground. She kept asking why we needed such thick metal bars and whether we could use something lighter to save money. I had to explain that structural steel isn't negotiable. It's literally what keeps buildings from falling down. Then she suggested we could speed up the process by having the crane operator work faster. I had to explain that crane operations are about precision and safety, not speed. You don't rush a 5-ton steel beam into place because some MBA wants to impress her boss with efficiency metrics. The first red flag was when she questioned why we needed so many safety meetings. Couldn't we just send out an email instead? She asked during her first management meeting. I had to explain that half our crew barely speaks English, and most of them don't check email regularly. Plus, safety isn't something you communicate through memos. It requires hands-on demonstration and constant reinforcement. She rolled her eyes like I was being difficult. Then she started questioning project timelines that had been industry standard for decades. I'd tell her a foundation pour needed 48 hours to cure before we could start framing, and she'd ask why we couldn't fast-track that process. When I explained that concrete physics don't care about her timeline, she'd make notes about my resistance to innovation. She constantly talked about her previous job at a Fortune 500 company, in retail management, by the way, and dropped hints about other opportunities she was considering. She treated our company like it was beneath her, some kind of stepping stone to bigger and better things. But the real problem was watching her manipulate Kevin. This guy had been married to his high school sweetheart for 15 years, but Amanda had him wrapped around her finger within months. She'd wear these low-cut blouses to meetings and laugh at his terrible jokes. She'd ask for his advice on strategic decisions and make him feel like some kind of business genius. I'm not saying anything physical was happening, but the woman knew exactly what she was doing. She'd touch his arm when they talked, send him texts at odd hours about urgent business matters, and find excuses to work late when his wife wasn't around. Meanwhile, she was making enemies with everyone else. She tried to eliminate overtime pay by reclassifying workers as independent contractors. She wanted to switch to cheaper suppliers who provided substandard materials. She pushed for tighter project schedules that would have compromised safety and quality. Every time I pushed back on her ideas, she'd make it personal. Mike, I understand change can be difficult for people who've been doing things the same way for a long time, she'd say in this condescending tone. But we need to think about what's best for the company's future. The breaking point came when she proposed eliminating the pension plan entirely for new hires and restructuring the existing plan to reduce costs. During the meeting where she presented this idea, she actually said, "We need to move away from these outdated compensation models that create entitlement." Entitlement. Like 20 years of working in all weather, managing million-dollar projects, and maintaining perfect safety records was somehow me feeling entitled to the benefits I was promised when I was hired. That's when I knew she was gunning for me. I had 6 weeks left until my pension vested, and this woman saw me as an expensive liability she wanted to eliminate. Amanda started her campaign against me about 3 months before my pension date. It was subtle at first. She'd question my decisions in front of clients, second-guess my material orders, and find fault with things that had never been problems before. She instituted these new efficiency reports where project supervisors had to justify every decision and document any delays. For a guy like me who'd been running projects on handshake agreements and trust for nearly 20 years, suddenly having to write reports about why I ordered 10% extra rebar for a foundation was insulting as heck. The documentation got more aggressive over time. If I was 10 minutes late to the office because traffic was bad, she'd note it. If I disagreed with one of her cost-saving measures during a meeting, she'd write it up as resistance to management directives. If I explained why certain procedures were necessary for safety or quality, she'd frame it as unwillingness to adapt to new methodologies. She started showing up to my job sites unannounced, always with her tablet, always asking questions designed to make me look incompetent in front of my crews. Mike, why are we using 2x10 joists here when 2x8s would meet code? She'd ask, not understanding that the extra strength prevented callbacks and warranty issues down the road. What she didn't understand was that meeting minimum code requirements isn't the same as building quality structures. Those 2x10 joists would prevent floor bounce, reduce long-term settling, and eliminate callbacks 6 months later when the homeowner complained about squeaky floors. But Amanda only saw the extra cost, not the long-term value. Another time, she questioned why we were using treated lumber for exterior framing, when regular wood costs less. I had to explain that untreated lumber would rot within 5 years in our climate, leading to structural failure and massive lawsuits. She made notes about my tendency to over-engineer projects and resistance to cost optimization. The most frustrating incident happened during a commercial pour. We were installing a foundation for a 50,000 square foot warehouse, and Amanda showed up demanding to know why we needed so much rebar. She'd apparently looked up some basic construction information online and thought she was an expert. I explained that the rebar grid was engineered to handle the specific load requirements of the building, including the weight of fully loaded storage racks. But couldn't we just use less and save money? She asked, completely missing the point that structural engineering isn't optional. When I told her that reducing rebar would violate building codes and create liability issues, she wrote it down as another example of my inflexibility. The most frustrating part was that she'd contradict safety protocols I'd been following for decades. She questioned why we needed fall protection for work under 10 feet. OSHA requires it at 6 feet. She wanted to know why we couldn't pour concrete in freezing weather, because it doesn't cure properly and creates structural weaknesses. She'd ask why we needed multiple inspections when one should be sufficient. Every question was phrased like I was being unreasonable or old-fashioned. She'd say things like, "I'm just trying to understand why we can't find more efficient ways to do this," while taking notes on her tablet that I knew would end up in some report about my inflexibility. I started keeping my own documentation of our interactions, because I could see where this was heading. I recorded a few conversations on my phone when she was being particularly unreasonable about safety issues. I saved emails where she pushed back on industry standard practices that existed for good reasons. The real turning point came when she hired her boyfriend as assistant operations coordinator. This guy, Brad, was 26 years old with a business degree and had never worked a day of construction in his life. But suddenly he was shadowing me on job sites, learning the ropes so he could bring fresh perspective to project management. Brad was actually a decent kid, but watching Amanda position him to take over my responsibilities was infuriating. She'd have him sit in on client meetings, review my project proposals, and even question my material choices. It was obvious she was grooming him to replace me, using my own experience and knowledge to train my replacement. 2 months before my pension date, Amanda started building what she thought was an airtight case against me. She documented a client complaint about a project delay, caused by her insistence on using cheaper materials that had to be reordered when they failed inspection. She wrote me up for poor communication when I refused to cut corners on a foundation that would have compromised the building's structural integrity. The final straw was when she tried to blame me for a cost overrun on a commercial project. The overrun was actually caused by her decision to switch concrete suppliers mid-project to save money. The new supplier's concrete had different curing times that delayed our schedule by a week. But according to her report, the problem was my failure to adapt to changing circumstances. I knew I was in serious trouble, but I kept thinking I just had to survive 6 more weeks. Surely she wouldn't fire someone 6 weeks before their pension vested. That would be illegal, right? I was about to find out exactly how wrong I was. Amanda called me into the conference room on a Thursday morning, exactly 2 weeks before my 20-year anniversary. Kevin was there too, looking uncomfortable as heck. I knew it was bad news the second I walked in and saw the folder on the table. "Mike," Amanda said, sliding the folder across the table, "we need to discuss some performance issues that have come to our attention." She went through her manufactured case against me, the client complaint, the cost overruns, my resistance to new procedures. It was all twisted facts and half-truths, but she presented it like I was some kind of liability the company couldn't afford to keep. "We've decided that the company needs to make some changes to remain competitive," she continued with practiced corporate speak. "Unfortunately, that means restructuring some positions. including yours. My heart dropped into my stomach. What are you saying? Your position as senior project supervisor is being eliminated effective immediately, Kevin said, finally speaking up. He couldn't even look me in the eye. We're transitioning to a flatter management structure with fewer supervisory roles. I'm 2 weeks away from my 20-year pension, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Amanda leaned forward with this fake sympathetic expression. I understand this is difficult timing, Mike, but business decisions can't be based on personal timelines. The company has to do what's best for its future. I wanted to reach across that table and shake some sense into both of them. 20 years of my life, of missing my kids' baseball games and school plays because I was on job sites. 20 years of getting up at 5 a.m. and coming home exhausted. 20 years of building this company's reputation with my sweat and expertise. What about severance? I asked. You'll receive 2 weeks' pay, which meets our legal obligations, Amanda replied. And of course, we'll provide a positive reference for your job search. 2 weeks' pay for 20 years of service. And my pension? Unfortunately, since your employment is being terminated before the 20-year vesting period, pension benefits don't apply, she said, with this practiced corporate tone. I know it's disappointing, but those are the plan rules. Kevin finally spoke up again. Mike, you've been a valued employee, but the construction industry is changing. We need people who can adapt to new methodologies and embrace innovation. Innovation. Like this woman who didn't know the difference between rebar and PVC pipe was going to innovate anything in construction. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at a job site where guys were pouring a foundation for a strip mall. Guys who trusted me to make sure their work was safe and profitable. Guys who had no idea their company had just thrown away 20 years of loyalty to save some money and make room for someone's incompetent boyfriend. When's my last day? I asked. Today, Amanda said. Brad will be taking over your current projects. We'll need you to brief him on the status of each one before you leave. Brad, the kid who 3 months ago didn't know what a level was taking over projects worth millions of dollars. I turned around and looked at both of them. Amanda had this satisfied smirk on her face, like she just won some kind of game. Kevin looked guilty but determined, like a guy who'd already committed to a bad decision and was going to see it through. All right, I said. I'll clean out my office and brief Brad on the projects. But I want everything in writing. The termination reason, the severance terms, all of it. Of course, Amanda said. HR will have the paperwork ready within the hour. I walked out of that conference room knowing my life had just changed forever. But I also knew something Amanda didn't. She'd just made the biggest mistake of her career. Time to show this princess what happens when you mess with a guy who's been building things his whole life. That night, I sat in my garage and really thought about what had just happened. Sarah was inside helping the kids with homework, and I hadn't told her yet. How do you tell your wife of 18 years that you just lost the pension that was supposed to secure your family's future? But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. This wasn't just unfair. It was illegal as heck. You can't fire someone 2 weeks before their pension vests just to save money. There had to be laws against this kind of discrimination. I spent the entire weekend researching employment law, pension regulations, and wrongful termination cases. I learned terms I'd never heard before: fiduciary duty, ERISA violations, pension interference. I read about cases where companies had been forced to pay millions in damages for exactly what Amanda had done to me. What I found gave me hope. Firing someone specifically to prevent pension benefits is called pension interference, and it's a federal crime under ERISA, Employee Retirement Income Security Act. The law was specifically designed to prevent exactly what Amanda had done: firing employees right before their benefits vest to save money. Even better, I realized Amanda had made several critical mistakes that would help my case. First, the timing was way too obvious. 2 weeks before vesting? Any labor lawyer would see right through that. The law actually creates a presumption of discrimination when someone is fired close to their pension date. Second, they weren't really eliminating my position. They were giving it to Brad. I had emails where Amanda discussed Brad transitioning into project management responsibilities. That proved the restructuring story was complete nonsense. Third, Amanda had created a paper trail of targeting me specifically while ignoring similar performance issues from other supervisors. I'd saved every email, every write-up, every criticism. The pattern was so obvious it was almost comical. But here's where it gets interesting. Over the weekend, I decided to do some digging into Amanda's background. I started with LinkedIn, then moved to Google searches, professional licensing boards, and even some basic public record searches. What I found was pure gold. This woman wasn't some hotshot MBA success story. She'd been fired from her previous job at a retail company for filing false expense reports, basically stealing money through fake business expenses. Before that, she'd been let go from a marketing firm for performance issues that, when I dug deeper, included conflicts with multiple coworkers and missed deadlines on major projects. Her LinkedIn profile was full of exaggerated achievements and job titles that didn't match what her previous employers would actually confirm. She claimed to have increased operational efficiency by 40% at the retail company. But when I found a former coworker on Facebook, they told me she'd actually been there less than 8 months and was fired for cause. Even better, I found out that Amanda was already planning her exit from our company. She'd been interviewing for director positions at larger construction companies, using her successful restructuring of our company as a selling point on her resume. She was literally destroying careers to pad her resume for her next job. I also discovered that she'd been posting on professional networking sites about legacy employee challenges and modernizing workforce demographics. It was clear she saw experienced employees as problems to be solved, not assets to be valued. But the real smoking gun came from Brad himself. The kid felt bad about how I'd been treated and started confiding in one of my former crew leaders over drinks one night. Turns out Amanda had been pressuring Kevin to fire me for months, specifically mentioning the pension savings. She'd calculated that eliminating me and two other senior guys close to vesting would save the company over $1.8 million in pension obligations. According to Brad, Amanda had actually created a spreadsheet showing the cost savings from firing senior employees before their pensions vested. She'd presented this to Kevin as a strategic workforce optimization plan. The woman had literally turned pension theft into a PowerPoint presentation. Brad also mentioned that Amanda had been pushing Kevin to sell the company to a larger firm where she could secure a VP position. Getting rid of expensive legacy employees was part of making our company more attractive to buyers. Monday morning, instead of looking for a new job, I drove to the offices of a law firm that specialized in employment cases. I walked in with 3 boxes of documentation, emails, recorded conversations, and background research on Amanda. My lawyer looked through my evidence for about an hour before leaning back in his chair and smiling. "Mike," he said, "this is one of the most clear-cut cases of pension interference I've ever seen. They didn't even try to hide what they were doing." My lawyer agreed to take my case on contingency, which meant I didn't have to pay anything up front. We spent the next 2 weeks building an airtight case. He interviewed Brad, who was surprisingly willing to tell the truth about what Amanda had told him. We documented Amanda's pattern of targeting senior employees. We obtained her expense reports and employment history. Most importantly, my lawyer discovered that I wasn't the only victim. Amanda had convinced Kevin to fire 2 other longtime employees in the past 6 months. Pete Rodriguez, a 26-year veteran foreman who was 18 months from vesting. Carol Williams, a 22-year veteran office manager who was 14 months from vesting. The total savings in avoided pension costs was over $2.1 million. Amanda had been systematically eliminating senior employees and positioning it as modernization. 3 weeks after my termination, my lawyer sent the company a demand letter. We weren't just seeking my job back and pension rights, we were demanding a full investigation into Amanda's hiring practices and complete financial disclosure of the pension plan's status. The company's response was to offer me a settlement of 3 months' salary, to go away quietly and sign a non-disclosure agreement. My lawyer's response was to file a federal lawsuit and contact the Department of Labor. The war was just beginning. Within days of filing the federal lawsuit, things started moving fast. The Department of Labor opened an investigation into the company's pension plan management. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission launched their own inquiry into age discrimination practices. Local news picked up the story when court documents became public. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more ace up my sleeve that Amanda had no idea was coming. See, over my 20 years at the company, I'd built relationships with pretty much every major subcontractor, supplier, and client in the region. These weren't just business relationships. These were friendships forged through years of successful projects and mutual respect. I started making phone calls. I called the owner of the largest electrical contracting company in the state. His crews had worked on probably 50 of my projects over the years. I told him what happened and asked him to be careful about any new project managers the company tried to put on his jobs. I called the owner of the concrete company we'd used for 15 years. Her company had grown from 3 trucks to 25 trucks largely because I'd recommended them to other contractors when their work was consistently excellent. I called every major supplier, every trusted subcontractor, every client who'd specifically requested me on their projects. I didn't ask them to boycott the company. I just told them my story and suggested they might want to be extra careful about quality control on future projects. The impact was immediate and devastating. Within 2 weeks, 3 major clients had canceled upcoming projects, citing concerns about management continuity. 5 key subcontractors declined to bid on company jobs, saying they were too busy with other projects. 2 suppliers implemented new credit terms that required cash payments up front instead of the net 30 terms the company had enjoyed for years. Meanwhile, Brad was struggling to manage the projects I'd left behind. The kid was smart enough, but construction project management isn't something you learn from textbooks. Within a month, 2 projects were behind schedule and one was facing cost overruns because he'd approved change orders without understanding their implications. One project had a concrete pour that failed inspection because Brad didn't understand the weather requirements for curing. Another had electrical work that had to be redone because he didn't catch conflicts between the plans and the actual building layout. A third project was delayed 3 weeks because he ordered the wrong size steel beams and didn't catch the error until they arrived on site. Amanda tried to blame the problems on sabotage by disgruntled former employees, but Kevin was starting to see through her nonsense. When the third client complained about poor project management, Kevin started asking hard questions about whether firing me had been the right decision. The local news story made things worse. The headline was "Construction Worker Fired Weeks Before Pension," and it included interviews with Pete and Carol, the other employees Amanda had targeted. The reporter had done her homework and found Amanda's employment history, including the expense report fraud at her previous job. Suddenly, Amanda wasn't looking like such a brilliant hire. Kevin started getting calls from other construction company owners asking if the news stories were true. The local contractors association quietly removed the company from their board of directors. But the real turning point came when the Department of Labor investigation uncovered something nobody expected. Amanda hadn't just been targeting pension-eligible employees. She'd been systematically overcharging clients and stealing money. The investigation found that Amanda had been adding 3 to 5% administrative fees to project budgets and routing the money to a consulting company she'd set up. Over 18 months, she'd stolen nearly $400,000 from the company and their clients. When confronted with the evidence, Amanda tried to claim the fees were legitimate management consulting charges. But the invoices were all fake. The consulting company had no employees other than her, and she couldn't explain what services had been provided. Kevin finally realized he'd been played by a criminal who'd been systematically destroying his company while stealing from it. Amanda was fired immediately, and Kevin called the police to file theft charges. But the damage was done. The company's reputation was in ruins. Key employees were gone, major clients had left, and the company was facing multiple lawsuits. Kevin was looking at bankruptcy or selling to a competitor at a fraction of what the company had been worth a year earlier. That's when my phone rang. The call came on a Tuesday morning about 4 months after I'd been fired. It was Kevin, and he sounded like a broken man. "Mike," he said, "I need to talk to you. Can we meet somewhere private? We met at a diner outside town." Kevin looked like he'd aged 10 years in 4 months. His hands were shaking as he drank his coffee, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "I messed up," he said without any preamble. "I messed up so bad I might lose everything my dad built." I didn't say anything. Just let him talk. "Amanda's been arrested for embezzlement. The DA says she might get 5 to 7 years. The company's hemorrhaging money. We've lost 60% of our clients, and I can't get good project managers because word's gotten around about what we did to you." He paused and looked me straight in the eye. "I need your help, Mike. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm begging you. Come back and help me save the company." I leaned back in the booth and studied this guy who'd thrown away 20 years of my loyalty for a pretty face and some fake MBA credentials. "What exactly are you offering?" I asked. "Your old job back, full back pay for the 4 months you've been gone, immediate vesting of your pension, and a 25% raise," he said quickly. "Plus equity in the company, 10% ownership stake." It was a good offer. A really good offer. But I wasn't done yet. "Kevin, 4 months ago, you sat in that conference room and watched Amanda destroy my career. You looked me in the eye and told me the company needed to move in a different direction. Now you want me to come back and fix the mess you made?" "I know," he said. "I was an idiot. She had me convinced that I needed to modernize or we'd go out of business. She made me think you and the other senior guys were holding us back. So now you realize experience actually matters? Mike, please. I've got 40 families depending on this company for their livelihood. My dad's retirement is tied up in company stock. If we go under, he loses everything. The bank's already talking about calling our loans." I signaled the waitress for more coffee and made Kevin sweat for a few minutes while I thought about his offer. "Here's what's going to happen," I finally said. "I'll come back, but not as an employee. I want a consulting contract worth $200,000 per year for 3 years, guaranteed. I want 15% equity in the company, not 10%. And I want complete authority over all project management decisions. No interference from you or anyone else. Kevin nodded eagerly. Done. Anything else? Yeah. Pete Rodriguez and Carol Williams get their jobs back with full pension credit and back pay. You're going to make public statements acknowledging that their terminations were wrongful. And you're going to establish a $500,000 fund for employee training and safety programs. Agreed, he said immediately. One more thing, I said, leaning forward. You're going to write a letter to every client, every subcontractor, and every supplier explaining what really happened and apologizing for the disruption Amanda caused. You're going to take full responsibility for hiring her and acknowledge that getting rid of experienced employees was a mistake. Kevin winced but nodded. His pride was apparently the price of saving his company. And if I do this, I continued, you never second-guess my decisions again. You hired me to save this company, so you let me do it my way. No more management consultants, no more efficiency experts, no more outside opinions from people who've never built anything in their lives. Absolutely, Kevin said. Whatever you say. I didn't start back immediately. I made him wait another 2 weeks while my lawyer drew up the consulting contract and equity agreement. During those 2 weeks, the company lost another major client and had a serious safety incident on one of Brad's projects. Nobody was seriously hurt, but OSHA fined them $50,000. When I finally walked back into the company offices, it was as a part owner with guaranteed income and complete control over operations. The first thing I did was implement proper project management protocols and safety training. The second thing was to start rebuilding relationships with the clients and subcontractors Amanda had alienated. The third thing I did was sit down with Brad and give him some real training. The kid had potential, but he needed to understand that construction isn't about cutting corners or impressing people with fancy terminology. It's about building things that last and keeping people safe while you do it. Within 6 months, we'd won back most of our major clients and landed 3 new projects worth over $4 million total. The company went from near bankruptcy to profitable again, and my equity stake was already worth more than my original pension would have been. Amanda, meanwhile, was convicted of embezzlement and sentenced to 4 years in prison. Her arrest made the local news again, this time with the headline, "Former Construction Executive Sentenced for Theft." The story mentioned that her scheme had been uncovered during the investigation into my wrongful termination. Pete and Carol both came back and are doing great. Pete's actually being groomed to take over as operations manager when Kevin eventually retires. Carol's running the office more efficiently than it's ever been run, and she's implemented new financial controls to make sure nobody can pull what Amanda did ever again. As for me, I'm making more money than I ever dreamed of. I own a piece of a profitable company, and my pension is secure. My kids will be able to go to college without debt. Sarah was able to quit her job and go back to school to become a teacher, which she'd always wanted to do. The best part is that every day I walk into that office, everyone knows that experience and loyalty actually matter. Nobody's going to fire me 2 weeks before my pension vests because I am the pension plan now. Kevin learned the hard way that pretty faces and fancy degrees don't build buildings. Skill, experience, and relationships do. Amanda thought she could eliminate the expensive old guys and replace them with cheap kids. Instead, she nearly destroyed a company that had been successful for 35 years. Sometimes the best revenge is just being so good at what you do that people eventually have to come crawling back and beg you to save them from their own stupidity. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, you get to make them pay through the nose for the privilege.